This video will be quite different from my other videos because in this video, as someone who is doing PhD in Indian history, I will try to review the movie Ashoka and see how historically accurate this film is. The movie was released in 2001 and it was a great success back then. But let's see how successful it is in our historical review. So we will start this review with this poster itself. As you can see in this poster, Ashoka is not written in the usual way. Usually we would write Ashoka as Ashoka. But here there is a bar on S. Now my guess is that the filmmakers of this movie wanted to use the IAST scheming to write Ashoka. What is IAST, you might ask? IAST stands for International Alphabet of Sanskrit Transliteration. And in this scheming, we use diacritical marks to write Sanskrit word using Roman alphabets. So these symbols that are attached to these Roman alphabets are what we call diacritical marks. So if we are using the IAST scheming, we will write Ashoka like this. But in the poster you can see that Ashoka is not written like this. There is a bar on S. Funnily enough, in the IST scheming, there is no Sanskrit word for which we use this symbol where there is a bar on top of S. My guess is that these filmmakers have just introduced a new symbol out of thin air. So this is the first mistake of this movie, and in my view a major mistake. Now let's move to the storyline itself. The movie starts with Chandragupta Maurya himself. The first thing that I noticed in this scene is Chandragupta's costume. The fact that there is no turban. This, in my view, is a very big mistake because in ancient times, the use of turban was extremely important. Any person who was influential would not be seen in public without turban. The only exception to this case were ascetics or monks. If you are from royalty, the use of turban becomes even more necessary. This we can see in the sculptures of Sanchi and Barhut, which are the earliest depiction of how ancient Indians lived their life. And in these sculptures, you can see that every male is wearing a turban, which shows that how in ancient India, turban was an important part of the dress. But in this scene, you can see that Chandragupta Maurya is not wearing any turban. Second big problem in this scene is that Chandragupta Maurya has short hair, which is quite ridiculous because in the past, everyone had long hair, be it female or male. The only exception to this were again monks, ascetics, or Brahmins. Brahmins had the tuft of hair on the back of the head. But for all the other, particularly when we are talking about royalty, they had long hair. Not only Chandragupta Maurya, but in this movie, even Bindusar is shown with short hair, which is quite ridiculous to be honest. Now in the next scene, we see Chandragupta Maurya talking to baby Ashok.
Ashok, mere putra, ye talwar nahi.
Now, how historically accurate is this? I mean, can we confidently say that Ashok would have chatted with his grandfather Chandragupta Maurya? The short answer to this question is no. Let me explain you why. We know from current scholarship that when Ashok became the Mauryan emperor, he was around 34 years of age. We know from historical sources that the total year of Bindusar's reign was 28. And after Bindusar's reign ended, there was a 4-year gap in which civil war raged in the Mauryan Empire and Ashok fought with various of his brothers. So between the end of Chandragupta's reign to the start of Ashok's reign, there is a gap of 32 years, which means when Chandragupta's reign ended, Ashok would have been 2-year-old baby. Now from what I have seen, 2-year-old are not as big as they are shown in this movie. Now I am just joking. The whole point is that the scene where Chandragupta Maurya is talking to his grandson Ashok, which is shown in this movie, is not historically accurate. Ashok would have been 2 years old during this time and he would not have chatted with his grandfather. Now let's move to this scene. Here in this scene you can see Chandragupta Maurya leaving with Jain monks. Now this comes from the Jain tradition, particularly the text Parishishta Parvan, where we are told that Chandragupta Maurya during the end of his life became a Jain. And along with other Jain monks, he migrated to the south, particularly the region of Shravanbel Gola. Chandragupta's life ended when he performed the Jain practice of Sallekhana, where a person slowly starves himself to death. So, if we go by the Jain tradition, this scene is historically accurate. But can we say that during this time, Jain monks wore white robes? The answer to this, in my view, depends on what tradition you follow. So, at present, we all know that there are two Jain traditions, the Digambar and the Shwetambar. The ascetics who follow the Shwetambar tradition wear white robes. The term Shwetambar itself means white clad. Whereas ascetics who follow the Digambar tradition, they do not wear any clothes. The term Digambar means sky clad. So if you follow the Digambar tradition, they believe that at this time Jain monks did not wear any clothes, whereas the Shwetambar tradition believes that at this time Jain monks used to wear white robes. So depending upon which tradition you follow, this scene becomes accurate or incorrect. Now in the next scene, Ashok is grown up.
और हमारी आधी सेना अभी तक यहाँ नहीं पहुंची है.
In this scene, Ashok is on a campaign and he is fighting the kingdom of Takshil. Now I don't know from where they have invented this term Takshil, because in Sanskrit sources it is Takshashila, and if you are going through Pali sources the term is Takkasila. There is no Takshil. And from the sources we know that Takshashila was situated between the river Indus and Jhelum, and presently it is the city of Taxila in Pakistan. Now, if the introduction of a new term Takshil was not stupid enough, the filmmakers have depicted the army of Takshil in this way. Now, I am pretty confident that this scene is shot in Kerala. But when we are talking about ancient Takshila, this type of narrow boat could not exist in that region, particularly in ancient times, because Takshila is surrounded by two rivers, Indus and Jhelum. And in ancient times, the currents of these two rivers was quite strong. This narrow boat could not handle the strong currents of Jhelum or Indus. So, not only the name but the location of the region is wrong in this movie. But what is even more surprising is that in this movie, the kingdom of Takshil is shown as an independent kingdom, and Ashok was sent by Bindusar to conquer it. But in our historical sources, Takshila is part of the Mauryan Empire, and it was conquered by Chandragupta Maurya himself. During the time of Bindusar, there was a rebellion and Ashok was sent to quell this rebellion. The 2nd century Sanskrit text Ashokavdan has this to say about the whole episode. Now it happened that the city of Takshashila rebelled against King Bindusar. He therefore sent Ashok there, saying, "Go son, lay siege to the city of Takshashila." And the interesting part about Ashokavdan is that it explicitly tells that this rebellion of Takshashila was started because the people of Takshila were fed up with the oppression of Mauryan officials, which makes it quite clear that during the time of Bindusar, Takshila was part of the Mauryan Empire. Now, in this scene, Ashok is shown returning to the city of Patliputra after defeating the kingdom of Takshil. This is basically a victory procession. Now my problem with this scene is that Ashok is riding on a horse. Now it is quite possible that a victorious prince would use a horse in a victory procession. But in my view, what could be more historically accurate, particularly in the ancient Indian context, is the use of a chariot or an elephant. Because generally in victory processions, you want as a leader to stand out from the rest. And chariots or elephants are great for this. You can see this in the sculptures of Sanchi and Barhut. In this depiction from Sanchi, you are seeing Ashok himself and he is riding on a chariot. There is also an important point in this Sanchi sculpture. Here Ashok is wearing a turban. But in the movie, Ashok is never seen wearing a turban. So this is how the movie depicts Patliputra, which is quite hilarious considering the fact that the place which you are seeing right now is Maheshwar. And these structures were built by the Holkars during the 18th century, some 2000 years after the Mauryas. So now because Ashok has conquered the kingdom of Takshil, his half-brother, who is called Sushim in this movie, is quite jealous of him. Now let's talk about Ashok's half-brother first. In this movie, as I have said, he is called Sushim. But in historical sources, he is called Sushim. So there is this difference which exists between the movie and the historical sources. Now what I find quite hilarious is the scene between Ashok and the assassin which Sushim had sent. So here is our assassin and he is trying to assassinate Ashok when he is bathing. But in the next scene, now I don't know how he can just grab the sword. These are sharp weapons, these are not sticks. And what is interesting is that this kind of absurdity is not unique to this scene. It continues. Ashok, for instance, does it often. And here, Sushim does it. And then this. From this, we can say that in modern times, people had this amazing magical power where they can just grab swords. They would not get injured with it. Anyways, moving on, this is Ashoka's mother. In this movie, she is called Dharma. This name appears in the Sri Lankan text Vamsathapakasini. But there are other names of Ashoka's mother. For example, in Ashokavdan, the 2nd century Sanskrit text, Ashoka's mother is called Subhadrangi. Now coming back to the movie, after the assassination attempt, Ashoka's mother wants Ashok to leave Patliputra. And after much hesitation, Ashok agrees. And in order to disguise himself, what Ashok does is that he cuts his hair. As I have said earlier, everyone in ancient times had long hair. If you cut your hair short, then you will stand out. This is not the best way to disguise yourself. Anyways, after cutting his hair short, Ashok leaves Patliputra. And where does he go? He goes to Kalinga. In this Kalingan adventure, Ashok meets Kauravaki. She is also in disguise. In reality, she is a Kalingan princess, and along with the heir apparent, she had fled from the Kalingan capital because the Kalingan prime minister or the Mahamantri of Kaling had already killed her parents, the king of Kaling and the queen. Now, the prime minister is after the life of the heir apparent. Now, you must be wondering how accurate all of this is. Historically, we do not know whether there was ever a Kalingan queen named Kauravaki. Most likely, this name Kauravaki is based on Karuvaki. Now you must be wondering who this Karuvaki is. She is the only queen of Ashok whose name appears in an inscription, the famous Queen Edict of the Kosam Pillar. In this edict, she is described as the second queen of Ashok and the mother of Prince Tivara. Now it is highly unlikely that this historical Karuvaki was ever a Kalingan princess. but in the movie, Kauravaki is. Ashok, who does not know about the reality of Kauravaki, falls in love with her, and exactly 3 songs later, he marries her. But sadly for Ashok, a messenger from Patliputra arrives, and he tells Ashok that his mother has fallen ill and she wants Ashok to come back to Patliputra. When Ashok arrives in Patliputra, King Bindusar commands him to go to Ujjaini to quell a rebellion. Now, when we look at historical sources, there is no mention of any revolt in Ujjaini. Instead, we are told that Ashok was the governor of Ujjaini and he had spent 10 years of his life there. In Ujjaini, Ashok also falls in love, according to historical sources, with a lady named Devi. Devi was the daughter of a merchant of Vidisha. In the movie, Devi is also depicted, but here she is a side character. Now, what is interesting is that this is how the movie depicts Vidisha. This type of cave looks more like the caves which we found in Western Ghats. If we are talking about Vidisha, which is the present Bhilsa that is in Madhya Pradesh, if you have ever been to Bhilsa or Madhya Pradesh, you will know that these types of caves do not exist there. This type of historical inaccuracy is not only limited to locations. In this movie, many times we see this idol of Lord Buddha. And then in this scene, we see this. These sculpted representations of Lord Buddha did not exist during the Mauryan period. Even in the sculptures of Sanchi, Barhut and Amravati, all of which were constructed some 200 or 300 years after the Mauryan period, do not show Buddha in human form. Take for example this figure, where an empty throne represents Lord Buddha, or this figure where the horse without a rider represents the departure of Buddha from Kapilavastu, or this figure where Bodhi tree represent Buddha's enlightenment. So you can see in these sculptures that Gautam Buddha is not represented in human form. All of this means that there were no idols of Buddha during the Mauryan period. Now when we move to this scene, which is supposedly from Vidisha, there is this painting. I'm sure through this painting and the presence of monk, the filmmakers want us to feel that this is a monastery. But there is a minor problem. This painting is not from Vidisha. In fact, this painting is not even from any part of the Indian subcontinent. It is from Turfan, which is in the Xinjiang province. And this painting dates to around 7th or 8th century AD. Now these are not the only mistakes that are related to Buddhism. In fact, in this movie, Buddhist monks are shown wearing white robes, which is quite strange because there is no evidence that during this period, the monks of Buddhist Sangha wore white robes. In fact, when we look at Buddhist sources, there is no mention of Buddhist monks ever wearing white robes. If we look at the Vinaya texts are basically the text that contains rules for monks and nuns. So the Vinaya text of different Buddhist traditions tell us that the Buddhist monks are permitted to wear robes of 3 colors or 3 different colors. If we are using the Pali Vinaya texts, here these 3 colors are Neel, which is a kind of dark blue color, Kadamma, which is mud color, and Kalasam, which is black color. In other Vinaya texts, these 3 colors are somewhat different. So if we are talking about the Mool Sarvastivad Vinaya, we find that here these 3 colors are blue-green color, mud color, and a kind of red. White color is never prescribed in any text. In fact, there is an inscription of Ashoka where he explicitly says, and I quote, "Whoever creates a schism in the Sangha, whether monk or nun, is to be dressed in white garments and to be put in a place not inhabited by monks or nuns." So it turns out that white garments are a sign that a particular monk is against the Buddhist Sangha. But in the movie, Buddhist monks wear white robes. So in this scene, these kids are shown with shaved heads, and in the background we have the idol of Lord Buddha, which means that the filmmakers want to tell us that these are little Buddhist monks. Now the question for us here is that whether in the early Buddhist Sangha, children were allowed to become Buddhist monks or not. Now, if we look at Buddhist sources, they are quite clear that anyone who is above the age of 20 can become a fully ordained Buddhist monk who are called bhikshu. But what about those who are below 20? So for them, there is a term which is used in Buddhist sources called Shramaner or Samaner in Pali. We can think of these Shramaners as novices. They are not fully ordained Buddhist monks yet. And in the Buddhist sources, we are told that those kids who are above the age of 7 can become Shramaner. So, from all this, we can say that these kids that are portrayed in this scene are basically Shramaners. Now, one aspect of this movie, which I have not discussed yet, but I find quite interesting, is the military aspect of the movie, which is quite close to my heart. And like other aspects of the movie, here again, the picture is not very good. Let's start with this sword. In this movie, we are told that this was the sword of Chandragupta Maurya, and it later becomes Ashoka's sword. Now, this style of sword never existed in ancient India. Although we do not have much sculpture evidence of early sword, but this sculpture from Iran can give us an idea about what type of swords were used by ancient Indians. These sculptures are from the tomb of the Achaemenid king Xerxes. And if you look at the Hindush and Gandharan soldiers, you will see that they are carrying a long straight sword. Something similar is also depicted in this sculpture from Barhut. Apart from these sculptural references, we have also literary evidence to suggest that in ancient times, sword with long straight blades were used. The movie not only gets this sword wrong, but we also see these curved swords, which belonged to the medieval period. During the ancient times, these type of swords did not exist. Not only swords, but in the movie, characters are also shown with katars. So you can see here, Sushim is carrying a katar, and finally we have Kauravaki with a katar. Like the curved swords, katars also did not exist in ancient times. If we move to the depiction of soldiers, here I must give credit to the filmmakers that they have shown these soldiers with turbans. But there is still a problem, and that has to do with the shield. From the sculptures of Sanchi, we can say for sure that round shields were not used during this time. Here you can clearly see that soldiers are carrying shields that are not round in shape. What I also find quite disappointing in this movie is that there was no depiction of chariots, which is quite strange because during this time, although elephants had become quite important, chariots were still used. We can see this in the sculptures of Sanchi, where chariots are depicted. In fact, in ancient sources, a great army had fourfold division or Chaturang Bal. So these fourfold division were infantry, cavalry, chariot corps and elephant corps. So chariot corps was an important element of a great army. And if we are depicting a army of the modern period, they had to have chariots. Now you can pause this video and see what is wrong in this scene. The answer is stirrups. During this time, stirrups were not invented. This sculpture from Mathura shows a horse rider riding a horse without stirrups. The same is also true about this saddle. You will not find this type of saddle in ancient times. This is a modern saddle. In the movie, fortifications of Patliputra are not depicted much, but we have this scene. This scene is not that long, but whatever we are seeing in this scene is all wrong. Because first of all, The walls of Patliputra were not made up of stones. We have Greek accounts that tell us that Patliputra was defended by a massive wooden palisade, and there was also a ditch, which is not shown in the movie. If we are to believe these Greek sources, this ditch was 600 feet wide and 45 feet deep. And since we are talking about Patliputra, this is how the movie describes the throne of Magadha. Now it is for you to decide how accurate this depiction is, considering that we do have some depiction of ancient thrones from the sculptures of Sanchi, Barhut and Amravati. Later in the movie, after killing his brother Sushim, Ashoka becomes the next Mauryan king, and he also decides to invade Kalinga. In the subsequent battle that happened, the Mauryan forces won. And seeing the suffering he had caused, Ashoka finally decides to follow Buddhism. Now, this whole sudden transformation is a modern myth. Most scholars nowadays believe that Ashoka gradually became Buddhist. There was no sudden conversion. Now, what do I think of this movie as a whole? But before I do so, I must say that at the start of the movie, it is explicitly stated that this is not a complete historical account of the Mauryan Emperor Ashoka. Even though this is not a complete historical account, we as viewers would expect that they would at least show the period correctly. Characters and stories can be fictionalized, especially when we are talking about a movie that is set in ancient India. Because when we are talking about ancient India, we do not have enough evidence and there are many gaps that exist. So to fill these gaps, we can use fictional elements. But when a movie that depicts ancient Patliputra by using an 18th century structure, it means that the movie makers does not give two hoots about ancient India or the historically of the whole period which they wanted to depict. This is like depicting Caesar strolling around the Eiffel Tower. Something similar happens often in this movie. Now you can watch this playlist to know more about what actually happened in the Mauryan period. And if you like this channel, do subscribe and please like the video. Thank you for watching.